Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marvin. In this video I'm going to give you some specific feedback on your synthesis essay rough drafts. This is another super casual weekend late night video. It's about 11:30 on Saturday. Got the windows open, feeling very relaxed, very tired, graded a lot of rough drafts, not just from both of my online classes for which this video is being made, but also my English 102 students handed in their poetry essay rough drafts on Wednesday. So I got about 50 papers or so to give feedback on as of Wednesday, and Thursday I had writing conferences all day with my on-ground students, and then I went to a conference on Friday. So that leads us to today, where I've spent most of the day grading. But as of this video going up, you will have received your synthesis essay rough drafts back from me. And like I did for the close reading essay, I wanted to make this video to give you some specific feedback, advice, recommendations, suggestions for you to implement as you start to revise your paper over the coming week in anticipation of the peer reviews and the final draft at the end of the week. So, as usual, I have a list of grievances over here of things that I saw across the board in your papers. Hopefully this video will be shorter than the close reading rough draft feedback video, and I think it will be because, generally speaking, I think these rough drafts were pretty solid compared to the rough drafts for the first essay. And I think that makes sense because, as we've talked about before, rhetorical analysis, which was the objective of that first assignment, tends to be a really foreign, unfamiliar, new concept for a lot of students and a lot of writers in general. And while synthesis is probably the same for many of us, I do think this essay is closer to essays that you may have written in the past. And that seems to come through in the drafts that you handed in. So I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. I just want to reiterate at the top of the video the purpose of the rough drafts. Right, the rough draft is your first version of the paper. So because of that, really what we're trying to do is make sure that you understand the assignment and that you are heading down the correct path, right? This is not where I make a lot of line-by-line grammatical edits. I grade the rough drafts using Blackboard's inline grading system, which is super not great to use. But as a result, you will get inline feedback from me, as well as some overall feedback when I send your paper back to you. But just know that I don't, to the best of my ability, correct every grammatical mistake or punctuation error. I will point those things out from time to time. Often, like I've said before, it is hard for me to resist. But generally speaking, what I'm looking for is this person demonstrating that they understand what the assignment is? Are they doing what the assignment is asking you to do? And really, I'm looking for any opportunities for content level, high level feedback, right? Major structural changes. So if we need to kind of back up and reverse and go in a different direction, now is the time to do that because the rough drafts are only 1 point each, right? You either did it or you didn't do it. I don't care how good or not good it is. Hopefully it's good. But you get 1 point just for doing it. So that is the purpose of the rough drafts. Again, I grade these using Blackboard's inline grading system, which is pretty cumbersome compared to even something like track changes in Microsoft Word that I use for your final drafts. But still, I want to reiterate the importance of making sure that you look at all of my inline feedback, right? So when you go into your grades section, right, and you click on the icon to bring up the file, you should be able to see all the little notes that I left all along your paper. And if you click on those, you should be able to see my specific feedback. I won't go over all of those specific things, but all the same symbols and shortcuts and notes that I leave have been explained in previous essay videos, whether it's the rough draft video or the final draft feedback video. But if there's anything you don't understand that I left on your paper, please by all means post in course questions or get in touch with me. I'd be happy to clarify. I want to reiterate that MLA format is super important. Remember that each paper that you do for this class is graded using 3 equal categories: content, style, and formatting. And that formatting part, the third part, is the presentation of your paper, whether or not you are following the rules of MLA standards, that is 12-point Times New Roman, double spaced, making sure you have the correct information in the upper left-hand corner. Do you have the page numbers in the right place? Is your works cited page formatted correctly? Are you citing things properly? Are your margins correct? Etc., etc. Once again, these things are either right or wrong. So there's no reason why you should not get a full score for formatting every single time. And despite that, I still get quite a few, not a ton, but I still get quite a few rough drafts that are just nowhere close to MLA formatting. I don't know if you just like to save that to the end, but just don't forget to do that, right? Because it's a really silly way to lose points if you just don't follow the directions regarding your font or your spacing or something like that. Again, the MLA formatting guide is available in course resources, and there is a video about how to format your paper for MLA standards, so make sure that you are following those relatively simple instructions. I wanted to start the video with the assignment sheet open here on the left because most of the big major takeaways that I want you to get from this video concern how we are understanding this assignment and also how we are structuring our essays. So my first couple of bullet points on my list here actually correspond to specific elements of the assignment sheet. So remember that the purpose of the synthesis essay is first and foremost to deliver your own original argument about the topic and to deliver that by way of a thesis statement, and to spend the majority of your paper proving and supporting that thesis statement in order to convince your reader to understand your point of view or your position and maybe even agree with you if you're very good. Okay, so that's what the first bullet point is here. Right? Present an original thesis statement about the topic. Again, the topic is the issue at hand. Unlike the close reading assignment where the topic was the article that you were analyzing, in this paper, the articles are your evidence, they're your support, and your topic is whatever the issue is. Okay, lots of different topics, right, which is very cool. But your thesis statement should be your position, your argument, whatever you believe about the topic at hand. And subsequently, the majority of your paper should be about you proving that original thesis statement. So what I mean by that is some of us are writing, some of our rough drafts for this assignment were very, very focused on the articles. And I don't want to say that's entirely a bad thing, but I think some of us are, you'll see frequently, or perhaps you will see in my comments too, you might see me say something like, focus more on your original argument rather than focusing on the articles. Remember the triangle thing that I said in the video, right? You are at the top of that triangle because it is your paper. Right? And so your voice, your argument needs to lead, needs to run the show. Okay? The articles are the base of the triangle, which means that they are supporting you, right, in whatever way you see fit. And they also, hopefully, the synthesis part is the bottom of the triangle where they relate to you. So both of the articles support your argument, and hopefully you're synthesizing the articles together, right, explaining the relationship between the author's ideas. So as a result of that, you may not necessarily need to bring, and I feel like I said this in the initial explanation video, but I'll reiterate it again here. You may not need to bring the articles into your introduction, right? It made sense to do that for the close reading essay because your topic was the article itself, right? So you had to introduce them right off the bat because that's what your paper was about. But with the synthesis essay, the paper isn't about the articles. The articles are there to help you, and what we're trying to do is synthesize the articles, but we're synthesizing in service of supporting our own argument. So because this paper is your paper about your argument, about your topic, it's probably a good idea to keep your introduction all about you. That is, all about your ideas, your voice. You introduce the topic, and you draw the reader in, and you deliver your original thesis statement, rather than starting right off the bat telling me about 2 articles that you found. You don't really need to do that. It kind of takes the it kind of robs the paper of the focus on you, right? It kind of puts the spotlight on the articles, which again, the paper is not about the articles. You're using the articles, and the articles are super important because the purpose of the paper is to synthesize, but really we're synthesizing in service of proving your own original argument. So I hope that makes sense. You want to have an original thesis about the topic. Okay? Your thesis should not be about the articles, right? That was the first paper. This is a synthesis essay. It's a different kind of writing. So your original thesis should be your thoughts about the topic. Subsequently, right, looking at this bulleted list here, and I really emphasize this bulleted list to my on-ground students and to my online students as well, because this is really what your synthesis essay should do. However, and I think this is my fault in designing the assignment, I think some people are interpreting this as saying you should do one paragraph for each of these bullet points. And that's not really what I meant. When I say your synthesis essay should do the following, it means that overall, right, in the whole thing, right, at some point, probably at the beginning, right, you're going to present an original thesis statement about the topic. You're going to introduce the authors. You're going to summarize the article's main ideas, right? But you don't necessarily have to do like, okay, this is my first paragraph. This is my second paragraph. This is my third paragraph. Because when you do that, I mean, again, it can work. I'm not saying this is impossible to do it this way, but when you try to kind of just cram each of these bullet points into one paragraph, the whole thing feels not formulaic and not really disjointed, but it just doesn't feel as cohesive as it could. So what I mean by these bullet points is that at some point in your essay, right, you are going to need to introduce the authors and you're going to need to summarize their main ideas because we haven't read the articles. That doesn't mean that you need to have a whole paragraph about the first person, the first author, and then have a whole paragraph about the second author. That's not really necessary, right? You could do that if you feel like it's if it's needed to get your point across, but that's not really what I was necessarily looking for. So in other words, I'm seeing a lot of rough drafts. I saw a lot of rough drafts where it was like intro with a thesis, and then so-and-so is a writer from such and such, and then a whole paragraph about this person. And then third paragraph, so-and-so is from such and such, and she wrote a different article. You know, and I see what you're doing, right? Because you are trying to follow directions, which is good, right? Because following directions is super important. But you don't necessarily need to dedicate an entire paragraph. So what I'm trying to recommend is instead of, let me bring up my word here. So instead of doing this, right? Intro with thesis. Where's my arrow shortcut? Whew. And then a paragraph about author A, and then paragraph about author B, and then a paragraph explaining similarities about the two articles, right? And then etc. Because you're going to have more than 5 paragraphs because this is a longer paper, and then your conclusion. Instead of doing this, because this model, you do have an original thesis, right, in the intro, but then like you focus really heavily on the authors. And I get how that you might have interpreted the assignment that way. And that's, again, this is my fault, right, in explaining the instructions. But it's not about the articles, right? The articles this is not a paper about 2 articles. It's a paper about your idea, your thesis statement. So instead of focusing on the articles so heavily, what you can do is intro with thesis, right? And then, and I wrote this in some of your comments on your drafts, right? Main idea A, main idea B, main idea C, main idea D, etc., right? And then your conclusion. So the difference here that I'm trying to get across is with this model, this version, the focus is on proving that thesis statement. So you present the thesis in the intro, and then you support the thesis statement with several main ideas. Remember, your thesis statement is held up. Think of like pillars, right, holding up a roof, right? The thesis is the roof of the paper, right? It's the thing that guides the whole paper. The main ideas are the pillars that hold that roof up. Okay, so main idea A supports the thesis. Main idea B supports the thesis. Main idea C, etc., supports the thesis. Maybe main idea D is where you address those counter arguments or those naysayers, like we read about in They Say, I Say. So in this model, every part of your paper is in service of proving that original argument of yours. And the articles are going to appear throughout these body paragraphs, throughout these main idea paragraphs. I hope you can, let me do this, make it a little bit easier to see. Right, so kind of like this. And here we go, main idea B, that makes sense. Okay. So in this version, right, the articles are there, right? You're drawing on the articles as needed. So rather than say, okay, here's my intro paragraph, and then here's my whole long paragraph about the first author, and then a whole long paragraph about author B, and then a whole paragraph summarizing the articles, and then a whole paragraph talking about what's the same between them. This is a paper about 2 articles, right? This is a paper about your thesis, okay? So when you do it this way, the articles are going to come in to main idea A. They're going to come into main idea B, right? The paragraphs about these main ideas. But you kind of, they're your evidence. So you keep the evidence in your pocket until you need the evidence, right? And then when you make a claim about whatever your argument is, right, then you pull out the evidence and you say, look, right, here's an article by so-and-so. So-and-so is a professor at such and such, right? Her article is about XYZ. She states, boom, right? And then you bring in the quotes, and then you explain. Remember the quote sandwich, right? The quote sandwich is you make a point, you introduce a quote that helps you prove that point, and then you explain the quote and how it helps you prove that point. That's really what you should be doing here. Okay, so I hope this is making sense. I don't want to over-explain because I don't want to ramble on, make the video super long, and just confuse you. But I'm getting a lot of this in the first draft. Right, a lot of this first version, and really what we should be aiming for is more of this kind of thing, right? Because throughout this, right, main idea, it's supported with quotes, right? And then you've got main idea B, supported with quotes, right? And then main idea C, right? Sorry. Okay, so you get the idea, and it's not just quotes, right? But ideally with quotes and synthesis, right? And it's not just quotes here, but it's and synthesis, right? So you're bringing in the quotes as needed. So the focus is not on the articles themselves. The focus is on your idea and proving your thesis. And you bring in the articles as you need them, right? You call on them as needed, and you analyze them as needed, as opposed to kind of making them the focus of your paper. All right, so I hope that makes sense. That's kind of the biggest thing that I saw across the board in a lot of rough drafts. And to be fair, some of you did a great job, writing papers like this. And some of you, a few of you, even wrote papers that kind of did both of these things at the same time, where the focus really was about synthesizing the 2 articles and explaining the relationship between the 2 authors' ideas. But at the same time, you were still able to get your own thesis statement across, and that was really impressive. So it's just a matter of reread your essay, right, as you continue to work on it over the next week, and ask yourself, am I doing this version or am I doing this version, right? And try out this version if you haven't exactly been thinking of your paper in that way. I'm not saying this version is going to, break your essay, but really the intent with this paper was to get your own original thesis statement across and to prove that thesis statement using synthesis, as opposed to writing a paper about 2 articles where you compare and contrast them. This is more of a compare and contrast sort of thing, right? Let me tell you about the first article. Let me tell you about the second article. Let me tell you what's the same and what's different. In conclusion, the focus here is less on your thesis. All right, so before I go on with that, I hope that makes sense. So it's a synthesis essay, but the synthesis is in service of your ideas as opposed to being the center point of your paper. What else? So speaking about synthesis itself, remember, to synthesize means to combine 2 ideas to form a new idea. And really, for our purposes, what you're trying to do is explain the relationship. I wrote that a lot on your rough drafts. Explain the relationship between 2 authors' ideas. Maybe they agree with each other. Maybe they disagree with each other. Maybe they complement. Maybe they build off of one another. Maybe they complicate each other's ideas. Maybe they contradict each other. But your job as the puppet master of this essay is to explain that relationship and tell us how it relates to your own thesis, to your own argument. Sometimes synthesis can happen at the sentence level, and it doesn't have to be a big deal, so to speak. If you remember the Nicholas Carr video, right, that paragraph that I looked at of Is Google Making Us Stupid, where he synthesizes in a single paragraph, it's not a very long paragraph. It's only probably, 8 or 9 sentences, 10 sentences maybe. And they're not very long sentences either. So sometimes synthesis can happen at that very sort of minute level, right? Where author A says this. On the other hand, author B says this, right? And then you just explain how they fit, right? Does it make sense, right? Are they contradicting each other? Again, all the things that I just said. But you do that in service of always bringing it back to your own idea, just like Carr does, right? He starts his paragraph with his idea. He brings in his two sources, kind of explains the relationship, and then he builds off of that relationship to further his own point. And that's really what you're doing. So sometimes synthesis can be as simple as saying something like, he agrees with Smith in that quote, right? Or she believes differently. And then you explain why she believes differently. You show us how she believes differently. Let's see what else. Smith, on the other hand, disputes this idea when he says, quote, right? So sometimes it can be very simple, right? Just a phrase that explains the relationship. That's why I said in the explanation video, it is really important to understand what synthesis is, but also don't overthink it, right? It's just a matter of explaining a relationship between two ideas. You've read this article, you've read this article. Explain to us how these articles can coexist, right? Or if they can't. And then where do you fit in, right, to this relationship? This relationship of ideas. Okay. While I'm talking about quotes and stuff, I'm going to jump down on my list here. While I'm talking about quotes, I want to talk about starting paragraphs with quotes. So I made a new shortcut. It's really late and I'm really tired starting paragraphs with quotes. I don't remember starting paragraphs with quotes. Doesn't matter. Okay, starting paragraphs with quotes. So a lot of times I will see a sentence that starts off with Jane Smith in, Jane Smith in her article such and such states, here's a quote. And of course you cite it if needed. Page 3. So let's say you start a paragraph this way. When you start a paragraph like this, I think you are kind of robbing your paper of your voice. Because, like I just said when referring to Nicholas Carr's article with that synthesis paragraph that I made the video about, your paper, your thesis statement, your argument, your main ideas. When you start a paragraph, that paragraph should probably start with one of your main ideas. When you start a paragraph with a quote, you're not starting the paragraph with your main idea. You're starting it with somebody else's idea. And when you do that, you're ceding the floor, right? It's like you're yielding your paragraph to somebody else. And you're just spending the rest of that paragraph reacting to the idea rather than running the show, right? Running your paper with your voice. Okay, remember how I always say keep your voice in the driver's seat? When you let somebody else start your paragraph with a quote, okay, you are letting them run your paragraph. And, once in a while, this makes sense to do, right? You want to do a whole paragraph just responding to one author's idea. But generally speaking, most of your body paragraphs are going to start with a topic sentence where you give a main idea, then you explain that main idea, and then you bring in a quote, right? It's a quote sandwich, and you are the bread in the sandwich, okay? The gluten-free bread. You are the bread in the sandwich, right? You start the paragraph, and you end the paragraph, and in the middle, you bring in the quote, right? Chapter 3, they say, I say. Okay, always worth rereading. So it's a quote sandwich. It's not an open-faced sandwich. When you start a paragraph with a quote, you are missing that top piece of bread, right? Which is you. Okay, so I think I've said this in other videos, so I don't want to prolong it, but do be careful, right? Be careful of starting paragraphs with quotes. Be careful of ending paragraphs with quotes. Remember, the quote goes in the middle. The quote is your evidence. It is your job to introduce the evidence and to explain the evidence, okay? You don't want to lead off with the evidence, and you don't want to end with the evidence and just say, I rest my case, and move on to the next paragraph. You have to keep control, okay, of your ideas and of the flow of your paper. So I think generally it's a good idea to err on the side of starting your paragraphs with your own sentences, your own main ideas, and ending paragraphs with your own analysis, a reassertion of those main ideas, rather than starting a paragraph with somebody else's words or ending a paragraph with somebody else's words. Because when you do that, you're not following that quote sandwich. And again, you're yielding the paragraph to somebody else. You're just reacting. You're letting somebody else run your paper. And that's not what you want to do. Likewise, I got a lot of stuff about quotes in here, so let me just go through these. Puzzle piece quotes, right? I've said this before, I'm sure. Just remember, with this paragraph, with this paper, like with the first paper, we haven't read the articles that you are writing about, so you have to be vigilant in explaining, giving us enough context for us to understand what the author is talking about at that point in the paper. So you need to provide enough context that we can understand what they're referring to. Right, so like if a quote says, Smith states, but doesn't explain the whole situation. Right? This quote doesn't make sense to us because we don't have the rest of the quote, right? We don't have the sentences around it. So that's the puzzle piece thing. The puzzle piece does not make sense without all the other pieces around it. So you have to just be vigilant in providing us with enough context. I don't know if I have the energy to come up with an example here, but if I said something like, so if the quote is, but that doesn't explain the whole situation, you might say, Smith expresses his frustration with the attempt to withhold information from the public when he states that it, and then maybe you modify the quote, doesn't explain the whole situation. That wasn't easy. Okay, so this is an example of a sentence, a setup, a quote setup that introduces the quote, but also provides context so that when we read the quote, it makes sense. We know that what it's referring to. Okay, so just be careful of that. You got to set up the quotes properly. Again, they say, I say, chapter 3, super important. Let me just do my usual thing. There's my shortcuts, right? Remember your naked quotes. Okay, be careful of these. This comes back to the quote sandwich thing in chapter 3. Again, I'm not going to harp on this, but when you introduce a quote, you have to set it up properly. Introduce it, right? Prepare the reader for a quote, right? Provide enough context like I just talked about, and do something as simple as saying she states. Okay, a lot of us are leaving this out, right? And this is a really easy thing, right? A really silly thing to leave out. So make sure that you're setting it up properly, and then you give the quote. And then, of course, you include a in-text citation if you need one, and then you follow up with explanation or analysis of the quote. Don't just move on to a new paragraph, okay? Because then you're not guiding the reader. And remember, it's your job to set up the dots. It's your job to connect the dots. Okay? Don't just give us a quote and expect the reader to get it. Okay, let's see. What else do I have here? When to deploy the sources. I kind of already talked about that earlier. You don't need to bring the sources right out of the gate, right? You don't need to introduce them in your introduction. You don't need to have a second and third paragraphs that give us a whole biography about each author. You can really save those sources until you need them, right? And when you look at each other, this is one of the benefits of the peer reviews. When you look at each other's rough drafts, right? Think about better drafts, excuse me. When you look at each other's better drafts this week, think about the things that I'm saying in this video. And, whether I said your rough draft was great or whether it needs work or something in between, right? We all need to get better, of course, always, myself included. When you're looking at each other's papers, right, notice how they go about doing it, right? Because even though they're using different articles than you, and even though they're writing about a different topic, they're still doing the same assignment, right? So you can learn from that, right? Oh, they don't even bring in the authors until the middle of page 2, right? Or wow, this person kind of spends a lot of time just telling us where this person went to school, and that doesn't really, maybe that's not necessarily useful. So all that is to say, you want to deploy your sources tactically, right? When you need them, when it's going to help you prove your argument. And I know, and I apologize for the lack of clarity here, right? But bullet point 2, introduce the authors, doesn't mean give me one paragraph about each author. Okay, so I apologize if you got that impression. And summarize the article's main ideas doesn't mean give me a whole paragraph summarizing the paper, summarizing the article. Okay, that just means that, again, we haven't read the articles, so you have to provide just enough context. Sometimes that's a sentence. Sometimes it's a few sentences, right? So that we can follow and understand your analysis and your argument and how the source relates to your argument. Okay, so again, it's not a paper about 2 articles. It's a paper that uses 2 articles, synthesizes 2 articles to prove your thesis. All right. What else do we have here? I got a bunch of stuff about sources here, so I'm just going to keep going with those. Try to use quotes to support your argument via analysis and synthesis rather than to inform your reader about the topic. So this kind of comes back to the thing, don't give me a whole paragraph summarizing the article. Some of us are using quotes to inform, right? To inform the reader about the topic, right? So try not to use quotes to just inform the reader about your topic. In other words, just like with the close reading, when you brought in a quote, you were expected to analyze that quote and explain how that quote fits into your thesis statement. It's the same thing here. So quotes are not used to explain the topic. Okay? I'm not sure how else to say it. You want to, whenever you choose to bring in a quote, right, it should be a deliberate, conscious decision, right? Because you say, I need a piece of evidence here, right? And I need something to analyze to help further make my point. If you're just quoting the article a bunch of times just to let the author teach us about the topic, you're kind of, it's not really the best use of quotes, right? Remember, too many quotes is not a super good thing. The quotes should be used deliberately, right? Each quote should be awesome, right? It should be a hugely beneficial thing to your argument. So remember, when you bring in a quote, your job is to analyze it or synthesize it with another quote, okay? And then tie that analysis or that synthesis to your own original thesis, right? It just comes back to the quote sandwich again, right? So your main idea, right? Then we have, get my arrows, right? Your main idea, then quote that helps support that main idea, right? Then analysis of the quote, and then tie it back to the main idea that started the paragraph, and tie it back to the thesis of the whole paper, right? Quote sandwich, right? You start the paragraph, you bring in a nice juicy piece of evidence, right? And then you spend time analyzing, explaining, tying that quote back to the main idea of the paragraph, the main idea of the thesis. You can do this exact same thing with synthesis, right? Let's say, if I just leave the stuff that I already typed, right? Your main idea, you bring in a quote that helps support that main idea. You analyze that quote. Maybe then you second quote, right? That relates somehow to the first quote. Explanation of how the two quotes fit or don't fit, right? As it relates to the topic, and then you tie it back, right, to the thesis. So whether it's you quote analysis, you, or you quote synthesis, you, it's the same thing. It's just like we're making, think of it like an analysis quote sandwich is like a grilled cheese, right? It's only got like 1 or 2 ingredients in the middle, but a synthesis quote sandwich is like, I don't know. I don't eat a lot of sandwiches, unfortunately. But like a double-decker sandwich, right? It's got more stuff in the middle because you got this person saying this, but also this person says this. And then you explain how that works, you know? Okay. What else? Okay, I think that covers it. Okay, so I think that's most of the stuff that I want to say about quotes. So the rest of these things here are just brief, sort of grammatical, high-level, or stylistic things. And again, I didn't go to the arduous effort of fixing all of these things on your paper, so I just wanted to explain some of them in the video. Again, remember the first person. And the first person is, of course, I think, I feel, I believe, I believe, I believe, in my opinion, right? All these good things. We are using a book called They Say, I Say. And the book talks about, I forget what chapter, but the book talks about the first person and whether you should use it. And like the book, I agree. It's not that you should never use it. It's not that you should always use it. But I'm seeing quite a bit of first person in this paper. It's a good way to distinguish between what they say and what you say. But remember, like the textbook says, it's not always the best option, right? You have to ask yourself, is this the right tool for the job, right? So if you say, I believe that everyone should own a gun. Okay. Remember the, way back when, remember the thesis statement video, right, about French fries? When you say, I believe that everyone should own a gun, this sentence is about you and one of your beliefs. What you believe is not debatable, right? Remember, I cannot disagree with you and say that's not true. You don't think that everyone should own a gun. Okay? So in this case, the focus becomes more on you. Whereas if you say, if you just say everyone should do this, that, or the other thing because, and then give your reasons, now the focus is on the idea. The focus is on the idea, and this makes your paper more argumentative. It's less about about your own feelings, your own beliefs, your own preferences, and it's more about the ideas. And the ideas are what we are here to argue about and write about and analyze and synthesize and debate. So, but this is still what you think, right? Because it's your paper. But you're just taking the focus off of you and putting the focus on the idea, okay, rather than on the fact that you think that. And I know that seems like it contradicts everything I was saying before about how the whole paper is about your thesis statement. But again, this is just a tonal thing, right? If your thesis statement is, I think everyone should own a gun, okay, that's not debatable, right? It's not debatable that you think that. What is debatable is that everyone should own a gun, right? That's something we can have a conversation about, right? So again, just be careful, right? Some of your first person was fine, right? And a little bit here and there, it's like a spice. A little bit can go a long way. But don't lean on it too heavily, right? And ask yourself, do I need to write my sentences this way with I think, in my opinion, I feel, I believe? Okay? Or can you leave that out and make your paper a lot stronger? And a lot of times I think you can. What else? Present tense. When you're referring to the authors, right, they use, the articles exist, and you refer to them in the present tense, right? So she explains, right? He makes a valid point when he says, even if the article was written 10 years ago, right, you still use the present tense because the article still exists, the ideas still exist. So you use the present tense when referring to them. Okay, page numbers. Parenthetical page numbers, right? Usually in an eminently formatted paper, right, Smith explains how the rapidly increasing llama population is causing major environmental, it's really late, environmental damage to Litchfield County. She states, here's a quote about, here's a quote about how the llamas are ruining everything. Okay, so usually, right, you would put a parenthetical citation, and you would include one or two pieces of information, right? Either the author's last name and or the page number. In this case, I don't really need to say Smith because it's pretty clear that this is a Smith quote because I've set it up properly like a good English 101 student. So in this case, I could just put, say this appears on page 173 of her article, right? Or 173 in our textbook or something. Okay, so in this case, I would just put 173. If you are, and this applies to most of you because your articles that you found for this paper are probably from the internet. And there's a chance that, if you're using a scholarly journal article or something like a PDF that's like a photocopy of the pages of a book, right, or something that you found on Google Books or Google Scholar or something, that there may be page numbers. And so if there are page numbers on the article, and I'm talking about like a real page numbers, not like, you know, how they break up an article into like 10 different web pages that you have to keep clicking next and next and next. Those aren't page numbers. But if you have like an actual article that has actual page numbers, you can still include the page number. But if it's just an internet article like most of you are using, there probably aren't any page numbers. Sure, you could print off, right, the paper and say like, oh, look, there's 3 pages. Okay, so this quote appears on page 2. But that's not really page 2, right? You just printed it off and it took up 2 or 3 pieces of paper. So what I'm trying to say is, in my delirium, is that you may not have page numbers for your articles, and that's okay. As long as it's clear where the article came from, who the author of the article is, what the title of the article is, and so forth, you may actually not need a parenthetical page number. In this case, I don't, because let's say, right, I said in her article, damn these llamas and their raging appetites. Jane Smith explains, right? So in this case, I've done everything I needed to do. I've told the title of the article. I've told the name of the person who wrote it, right? It's clear that this is a quote from her. So there's nothing else I really need to include in the parenthetical citation. Because it's an online article, there are no page numbers. So I don't need the parenthetical citation, okay? So, scary, but don't worry about it if you have an online article. A lot of people using the word refute in their papers, right? You got to make sure that when you use a word that you're using it correctly, right? So define refute. To refute is to disprove, right? Or according to my dictionary, to prove a statement or theory to be wrong or false, disprove, right? These claims have not been convincingly refuted, right? So some of us were using the word refute and we weren't using it properly. It's a great way to synthesize, right? If you say that author B refutes author A, that's very good. Just make sure that they're actually refuting and not just doing something else. Pet peeve of mine. Please stop saying that the author goes on to say, or the author goes on to explain, or the author goes on to state. I don't know why you all started doing this, but it's a really wordy and distracting way to just say that the author says. Okay, I know you're losing out on a few words here, right? The author explains. The author states. They don't go on to say. Okay, I don't know why we all started doing this, but please, for my sake, stop. After you leave this class, you can go back to doing it, but please, for my sake, please stop saying the author goes on to do something. Title case. Make sure that when you cite your article title, that you capitalize it properly. And this goes for your own title of your own paper too. Even if the author, in a weird online article like on Medium or something, and it's not capitalized in this way, I don't care. I want you to capitalize it in title case, right? Because if you capitalize it the way that the author did, you can make an argument that that's how it should be because that's the way the author did it. But I think it's also easy for your reader to think that you made a mistake and that you don't know how to capitalize things properly. So to avoid that, I'm just going to say title case your titles all the time, no matter what. What is title case? You can go to titlecase.com and just paste in the title, right, if you're super lazy. But what title case means is that you capitalize the first word, the last word, and all words that are not prepositions. The prepositions show relationship, right, of, by, with, okay, these things, or articles, definite or indefinite articles, right? So the, a, an. I think that's it. Okay. So please title case the names of your articles and the name of your paper. Ooh, okay, big grammar thing here. Possessives versus plurals. Okay, I've seen a lot of confusion about this. Possessive, right? Possessives show possession, right? This is Andrew's book. Okay. Yes, I know I have a shortcut for my name. So this is possessive. If you say there are 2 Andrews in our class, this is plural. So you'll notice that the possessive is what uses the apostrophe S, right? Apostrophe S. This is how you show ownership, right? It is the book of Andrew. Okay, so it's Andrew's book. When you just mean more than one, you just add an S usually, or an ES, depending on what the word is. Okay, but I'm seeing a lot of confusion. Sometimes doing the apostrophe when you don't need the apostrophe, or doing no apostrophe when you do need the apostrophe. So just be mindful of that. If I wanted, you could say Andrew's gonna be there. Yeah, in this case, right, this is a contraction, right? So it's not a possessive or a plural, right? But that's kind of a separate thing, right? So don't worry about that. If you have an author's last name that ends in an S, like let's say the author's name is Hughes, you have a choice to make here. You can say Hughes's article, put the apostrophe after the S, or probably the easiest thing to do, just because it's what you do normally, is to put a apostrophe S, right? So even though it looks like Hughes's, right, this is still technically correct. Yeah, so I would just say stick to the apostrophe S when it's possessive, and just the S or the ES when it is a plural. Plural meaning more than one. Let's see, just a couple more things here really quickly, and I know the video is probably longer than I thought, but hey, I'm the one that's up past midnight. Weak transition. Now, when you have two sentences, they should flow naturally from one to the next. When you have two paragraphs, they should flow naturally from one to the next. So this can happen, you can have a weak transition between sentences. If you start off talking about topic A, and then the next sentence is talking about something completely different, even if it's about the same topic, right? Like, marijuana has many health benefits, yada, 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 right? 4 million people smoked pot last month. Okay, those are both about marijuana, right? But how many people smoked it last month, and the health benefits, right? Those are unrelated. So if you have two sentences like that back to back, the reader's going to be like, what? Why is this confusing? And as a result, the paragraph is going to seem disorganized. Remember, one paragraph, one job, right? And that job clearly connects back to your thesis. This can also happen between paragraphs. Even though a new paragraph means that you're starting a new idea or a new topic, they still have to flow. Even if it's a simple matter of starting your next paragraph with, on the other hand, before you start talking about something else. There's just got to be a little bit of effort to smooth out, right, the transition from one to the next. That's why when you go from your awesome introduction with your own original thesis statement, and then in paragraph 2 you say, Jane Smith is from Kentucky University, and she wrote an article called whatever, whatever. It's a little jarring, right, because you went from introducing your own idea, your own thesis, your own argument, and now all of a sudden you're talking about this random author. Okay, so again, everything I said above. I think that's mostly it. Let me just look at my list one more time. We talked about MLA format. I think that covers it. Okay, so I'm sure this video ended up being super long, but I hope you find it useful. Again, everything that I say in the video, I say, or everything I write on the assignment sheets, I write. Everything I leave on your papers, I leave, because I think it's important. I think it's stuff that you need to know. And like we've said before, it is a two-way street, right? So I can spend the time making the videos and grading the papers and leaving the comments and answering the questions, but it is now up to you, right? So it's like ping pong. Okay, it goes back and forth. Okay, it is now in your hands, right? The ball is now in your court, as they say, to watch this video, to understand, to take notes on the video, to rewind things when you don't understand them, to ask me questions when you don't understand them, and to ask myself, okay, how can I take what Mr. Marvin said on my paper, in the video, whatever, and how can I try to follow his advice, right? I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but that's the effort that you need to take, right? Like I said in a previous video, I think the best thing that you can do to be an awesome student is to only allow yourself to be told something once. In other words, if somebody gives you a piece of advice or a piece of feedback, and you think critically about it and decide that, yes, they are correct and I should follow that advice, don't make them tell you again, right? Follow directions the first time given, I guess, is another way to say that. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions about anything I said in the video, anything I did not say in the video, please post in course questions. I would be happy to address them. Like I said, right, most of the drafts I think were more solid than the first paper. And again, I think that's because synthesis is a little bit more accessible than rhetorical analysis, but nevertheless, we all still have plenty of room for improvement before we post better drafts for our peers to read and before we hand in the final draft for final grading. Last thing I'll say is I just want to put in a plug for Advising Day. You've probably seen my announcement by now, but when this video goes up, or shortly after this video goes up, it's going to be April 1st, Monday, April 1st, and that is the first day of registration for the summer and fall semesters. Summer runs from middle of May to the middle of August. The fall semester runs from the end of August to December. So, you, as a student who is enrolled in English 101 at Three Rivers right now, are a continuing student, and so registration is going to be open for you. It's probably open right now by the time you're seeing this video. I might post this on Sunday, actually, but tomorrow it will be open. And there are advising days happening in the multipurpose room. So if you are local, the big meeting room next to the cafeteria from 11 to 3 and 5 to 6:30 on Monday, April 1st, and Tuesday, April 2nd. Faculty advisors will be down there, financial aid will be down there, the registrar will be down there, the cashier will be down there, program coordinators, anybody who you could possibly need to talk to, and there's usually a popcorn machine, will be down there. So it's a great opportunity just to go, talk to somebody, get help with what classes you need for your plan of study, get help changing your plan of study, get help with your financial aid, whatever. Okay, but please come to Advising Day if you're in the area and you can make it during those times, 11 to 3 and 5 to 6:30. I'll be down there for about an hour or so each day, helping out as well, so you could come say hi. But really, registering early is the best way, not just to get the classes and the days and the times that you want, but it's also the best way to keep your momentum going. I've been to a couple of conferences the past couple of Fridays, and talking about community college students and how we can better help our community college students, and a lot of our students, our graduation rate is, I forget what it is exactly, but it is under 20%. The vast majority of our students who take classes with us do not graduate. And even if you graduate with 50 credits, if you don't have that associate's degree, right, or you don't transfer and move on and get that bachelor's degree, nobody's going to care, unfortunately, about those 50 or 45 or however many credits that you earned. It's the degree that counts. And so registering early, communicating with your advisor, you can find them in Banner, in my ComNet. Look them up. If you can't figure it out, you can ask me and I'll look you up and I'll find your advisor for you. But registering early is the best way to keep your own momentum going, because as time goes on, after Monday, classes are gradually going to start to fill up. Some of them fill up quickly, right? If you're a science person, some of those science classes fill up really quickly. You don't want to end up with like an 8 a.m. or a bunch of 8 a.m.s. And so it's really great to just get it done, figure out what classes you need, talk to somebody to help you figure out what classes that you need so you feel good about the plan, right? So you feel like you're making progress. And then you don't have to worry about it, right? You can just relax, right? Or just keep working hard for the rest of the semester and then just relax when the summertime comes. So many of our students come to us in the middle of August and sign up really last minute. And that's stressful, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I hope you're having a good semester. I hope that the warm weather is lifting your spirits, even as our courses get more difficult for us as instructors as well as for you guys. And just know that, we've only got about 6 weeks and then it will be summertime. So it's important to power through and then you'll be moving on to the next thing, right? And you always want to be moving forward. So you want to be focused in the moment, but also have your eye on the big picture. And registering for next semester, for the summer and the fall especially, is the best way to do that, and register early, okay? So if you have any questions about anything, please do post in course questions. Even if it's about advising, I'd be happy to answer questions about that. But otherwise, I hope you guys are enjoying spring and these glimpses of warm weather that we're getting, and I will see you guys online. Good night.